Hello, everybody, and welcome to Finding Solace in Solitude, Meditation for Lockdown, hosted by the newly established Contemplative Studies Centre at the University of Melbourne. I'm Amy Bajaya, and I'm the Engagement Manager for the Centre. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay respect to our elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. The Contemplative Studies Centre was made possible by a very generous donation by Martin and Loretto Hosking, and we are delighted that this gift enables us to offer really important opportunities to simply be together in a mindful way, especially as at this time many of us are experiencing our fourth lockdown. In terms of housekeeping, please feel free to ask your questions via the Q&A function throughout the event, and we'll try to get to as many of these as possible at the end of the event. I'm delighted to welcome the Venerable Ajahn Brahmali. Ajahn Brahmali first became interested in Buddhism and meditation in his early 20s after a visit to Japan. He has lived in Bodhinyana Monastery since 1994 and was ordained as a bhikkhu with Ajahn Brahm as his preceptor in 1996. I would also like to welcome the inaugural director of the Contemplative Studies Centre, Dr. Nicholas Van Dam, who will be hosting today's event. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you all in the audience for joining us today. I hope you're weathering the current situation wherever you are reasonably well. So we'll start off today with just a little bit of discussion between Ajahn Brahmali and myself. And then we'll ask Ajahn Brahmali to give us a little bit of background overview info about meditation and the manner in which he guides that practice in his tradition and personally. We'll do a period of short meditation on the order of 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll have some discussion and or answer questions from those of you in the audience. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you all for your time. We hope that this offering is useful for the many people here in Victoria struggling with the lockdown and the many people everywhere, I guess, dealing with the complexities of COVID and what the implications of that have been for the changes in how we go about our day-to-day lives. I guess then the first thing I'll raise for Ajahn Brahmali is exactly with that, with respect to sort of considering the ways in which things have changed for so many people. And really just kind of acknowledging that life is really tilted on its axis in the past year and a half. And there's many sort of incredibly difficult conditions that people have faced, and I guess conditions that people have been facing for long times that maybe have become more real or more potent in this past year and a half. So what would you say, Ajahn Brahmali, that Buddhism has to say about finding your way in challenging contexts, and what advice might you give for people about how to make their way through these difficult times and sort of make their way towards something more meaningful and find some peace and solace?
Yes, indeed. This is obviously a very important question right now. It's a question that everyone is asking around the world, not only you, Nicholas, but pretty much everybody. So it's a great, it's a good place to start. And one of the things that occurs to me is that if you deal with the difficulties of life in a wise way, if you stand a bit back, then if you have a degree of mindfulness, awareness about the issues that are happening, it actually is a potential to grow in wisdom, which kind of fits in very well with the idea of your contemplative studies over there. And very often when we go through the hard times in life, if we use the opportunity in a wise way and we learn from it, yes, it is difficult, but instead of instead of getting drunk or doing stupid things when things are difficult, we try to learn from it instead. We actually come out in the end as better people as a consequence. That is so every difficulty is an opportunity. I know this is a cliche of the management, ordinary management education or business education or whatever, but there's also a lot of truth in that. Every difficulty is really an opportunity. And I remember a story I read a long time ago when I was a student. That's a long time ago now. And this was a girlfriend I had at the time. And so this is about, 35 years ago, something like that. And she gave me a book. And this book was a book on happiness, human beings and happiness. And this was written by a man who had just been through the Second World War. And one of the chapters in that book was called something like the paradox of happiness. And it was about the idea he claimed, and I think there's probably good grounds for believing this, that the time just before the Second World War was a time that was less happy than the time during the Second World War. And that was very fascinating because the Second World War in Europe, I'm European by birth, was very difficult. Yeah, we had the Germans invading our country. I'm Norwegian by birth, they certainly invaded Norway. And the Jews were sent to the concentration camp. People had, family members that were killed. It was much more difficult to get hold of food. Food was being rationed, clothes were being rationed. It was a very difficult time in European history. But the paradox was that people were actually more happy. And he said the reason was because we focused on different things. And what we focused on was caring for each other, looking after each other, having compassion for the community, working together against a problem in your society. And so the focus moved from material values to spiritual values. And the realization was that actually the spiritual values are far more important for human well-being, human happiness, than the material things ultimately. That is where real happiness is found, is actually inside. And so this is the thing that we need to bear in mind now during the COVID situation, is that if we turn things around, what we need to do is we need to find refuge in a different place. We need to find the refuge within, find the refuge in spiritual qualities, rather than always seeking the refuge outside in the world. And when you turn your mind around, this is really what contemplation is about. It's about realizing, finding the meaning of life, the purpose of life in a different area. And this is very much what meditation is about. It is very much what the entire Buddhist path is really about, is that looking at the world in a different way. And as you do that, you actually find greater meaning and purpose than you had before.
Thank you for that. Just one follow-up question. When you refer to sort of finding meaning in the spiritual, many people sort of associate the spiritual, and particularly sort of as I do, coming from a Judeo-Christian background in America, with sort of connection with, say, a church or with God or gods. So are you sort of suggesting or referring to connection with something like that, or is there another way of looking at it? So I certainly think that you can think of the spiritual sort of as just a greater meaning in sort of much more outside of oneself and those material possessions. I just wanted to ask you if you could clarify a bit on that.
I don't think you have to be religious at all to be spiritual. I think you can be an atheist, you can be an agnostic, you can be whatever. I was an atheist before I became a Buddhist. That was the natural background for me. But spiritual just means that you kind of concerned with the inner qualities of life rather than the outer qualities. It's about the value of the inner life, the mind, if you like, rather than external things. It can very well be combined with religion. You can be, a Christian or a Muslim or whatever, and you can practice meditation. Meditation is just a very natural method of calming the mind. It's got nothing to do with religion as such. And I would argue that, you can argue, depending on how you define Buddhism, you can argue that Buddhism is perhaps not even a religion. It really depends on the definition of that particular term. But arguably it's not. It's more like, I would call it a psychology. It's about the inner life. It's about understanding how to attend to yourself and attend to the world in such a way that it promotes well-being, it promotes happiness, rather than promoting suffering and misery. So this is open for everybody as far as I'm concerned. Don't have to be religious or anything else.
I guess, what advice do you have for people, if it's about sort of exploring the inner life and the mind, and sort of the experiences that happen in their life, what advice might you have for people when they encounter difficulty there, when they encounter, when they sit to sort of explore what's going on in their inner lives, perhaps they explore their day-to-day lives and sort of try to understand themselves in a way that they haven't really done before? What advice would you give them for how to approach that context, that inner life, when kind of difficulties come up, when they find themselves struggling or perhaps fighting about themselves, or thinking thoughts or having experiences that don't feel so great?
Yeah, well, I think you have to have an idea of development, of moving towards something. If you have an idea of development, of going somewhere positive, then you will be able to deal with the difficulties as they arise. because you have a sense that the difficulties are grist for the mill, and you have an idea of a bigger picture of where you are going, and then you will be able to deal with the difficulties. And very often the difficulties are just the ups and downs of life. Yeah, this is what life is like. But if you carry on, there is always an exit from those problems, just as there is an exit from COVID, as there is an exit from for everything really at the end of the line. So you have to rely on resources that are slightly different from the resources we normally rely on. You have to rely on kindness and compassion, morality, and understanding other people in the right way. And if you rely on those resources, then there's always a way through, because there's always a potential for growth, inner growth, if you follow those resources. So it's about stepping back and having a bigger picture of things, not allowing yourself to be too submerged in the short-term suffering of life, which is always going to be there, and COVID being one obvious case, but sometimes depression, sometimes sadness because of loss, and all of these things are temporary things that we pass through. If the underlying qualities are good, and you will come through at the other end, and you're very likely to be a better person or happy person when you come through at the other end.
Thank you very much for all that. It's very profound and insightful and helpful in terms of thinking about how to best approach this. I may now leave it with you for some guided practice.
Okay, sure. So let's do some a little bit of meditation together. Those of you who are interested, I'm just going to give you a little bit of guidance first of all, to give you some idea what meditation is about, what to expect, and how to kind of guide your mind in the right way. And the first thing to realize about meditation practice is to have an overall idea or view of what it is that we're trying to achieve in meditation. And you can say there is one overall purpose of meditation practice, and that is well-being. Yeah, is to move to a state where we have greater well-being. It doesn't necessarily mean that every meditation is going to be successful. It doesn't mean that sometimes you will have problems, but that's the general trend. And if you use that as a guidance in your meditation, you already have a very profound and beautiful way of thinking about this. Yeah, it is not just about kind of seeing the inner states and seeing suffering, seeing problems. It's actually about overcoming these things and moving towards something higher. That is the whole purpose. So some basic ideas of meditation is that there are certain times when you don't want to meditate. Yeah? There are times when you are very upset, for example, about something. And if you are very upset, there's no way that meditation is going to work. Do something else, have a cup of tea, listen to some nice music, go for a walk, read a book, whatever it is that it takes to get over your upset that you have. If you feel very restless about something, also not a good time to meditate, because there's going to be a clash between sitting down peacefully and the restlessness of the body and the mind. So only sit down when you feel reasonably at ease and reasonably peaceful. So you use other techniques to calm yourself down first, and then you can have some success in meditation. Often early morning can be a good time to meditate if you feel really if you feel rejuvenated after a good night's sleep. That can often be a good time. So once you have done that, then you sit down, and then you remind yourself. Well, first of all, I should say, how do you sit down? It does not matter how you sit down. Some people argue that sitting cross-legged is great. For many modern people, it's very hard to sit cross-legged, so don't do that. Sit on a chair, use a stool. You can even lie down, and some people have a lot of physical pain. And if you find that is the case for you, you can even lie down, as long as you don't fall asleep. Actually, if you fall asleep, that's kind of, sometimes that's okay. Sometimes you need to fall asleep, but you try to have that awareness even when you lie down. So any posture is really acceptable. The only thing that matters with posture is that you are at ease, you are relaxed. You don't have any unnecessary pains, you don't have any tensions in the body, and you try to be at ease all the way through. That is the only really thing that we look out for. So when you start your meditation, you close your eyes, and when you close your eyes, you are blocking out a very large part of the world, because the sight, the faculty of sight is such a dominant faculty in human beings. So we get so much information through the eyes. So even just by closing your eyes, already you can feel where you are at much better. So you start off just by feeling where you're at. Am I at ease? Am I comfortable? Am I no longer tense and all of these kind of things? And then you allow yourself time to calm down, to become less tense, to let go, and then to really be at ease wherever you are at that time. That is the ideal way of doing a meditation. Yeah, you can see if this works. It's going to be a very positive and nice experience if you get this right. And then once you are at ease, the main trick all the way through this is actually just to be very patient with what is going on. And if you are patient, and this now we're moving into the art of mindfulness itself. If you are patient and you are able to be aware of your body and your mind, what happens as a consequence is that gradually, as you are just aware, as you don't interfere with what is happening, you find that things calm down and you become more mindful, more aware of the content of your mind specifically. And the idea here is to gradually improve this awareness so we can see more and more of the content of what is going on, to stay in that awareness, and eventually, if the meditation goes well, to calm down to the point where you are aware, for example, of a single object like the breath. Yeah? So eventually, just being aware of the breath and then taking the breath as your meditation object and taking that as far as we possibly can. And you will be very surprised that an object like the breath can take you to some extraordinary states of mind if you keep on practicing it in the right way. So that is the basic background, basically to enjoy what is going on, enjoy the meditation, and making sure you move towards a peaceful and beautiful state of mind. And that is really what we're trying to do here. So let's try some little bit of meditation in practice, maybe about 20 minutes or so, not too long, and see what happens. So, following on from my instructions, just sit down, sit down comfortably, and then close your eyes, and then as you close your eyes, feel the body and feel the mind. And just make sure that you are at ease, that the body is comfortable, you don't have any unnecessary pains, you feel kind of at ease where you're sitting. And one of the great things is that if you are at ease in the body, the mind tends to follow along, because body and mind are so closely connected with each other. So make sure that you always take enough time to find that ease of the body as you get settled into the meditation practice. And so just stay with the body for now, just feeling the body. And if you need to take a few deep breaths or whatever to relax, that can sometimes be helpful. But the main thing is just to stay with the body. Have a sense of patience as you go along, a sense of gentle awareness directed towards the body. So you're kind of soothing yourself, calming down, with a positive attitude. And as you are sitting there, you will notice that there are all sorts of things going on. Sometimes you will hear sounds. Sometimes the mind will get restless. Sometimes you might feel a bit dull. Your job is really just to be aware. Just allow these things to go through your mind, standing back and having awareness of what is happening, with a sense of patience, with a sense of not being involved in what is happening. And as you are aware of your content of your mind and also the impressions from the external world, sometimes you will see things that you may not like or you may not think is right or whatever. But remember that all the content of your mind is just the ebbs and the flows of the world, the ebbs or the flows of your inner life experience. There is nothing really there to be judged. It is all caused by past conditioning. So instead of judging yourself or judging the mind or judging your experience, just allow things to flow. When there is no judgment, it is so much easier because there is nothing to be done. And when there's nothing to be done, you can flow along with awareness and mindfulness. And as you keep on just observing and being aware of your experience in this way, you will also notice that in between there are moments of peace when everything calms down and becomes very beautiful and delightful. Make sure that you notice that those moments of calm and peace, and as you investigate and you see the delight in those moments of calm, you will actually incline towards those things more in the future. One of the great things about the mind is that it inclines naturally towards those things it finds pleasure in. So if you find pleasure in peace, that is where your mind will go. And sometimes during meditation, you may wish to just nudge the mind very gently. We want to keep the awareness and we want to keep the doing to an absolute minimum, but a little bit of nudging can be useful. And one of the things we want to establish is a positive mind state, if possible. And to do that, sometimes just a very short bringing into awareness of some beautiful quality in your life can be sufficient to give that awareness. And one of the obvious things to contemplate now is very simply to have a sense of gratitude for the Contemplative Studies Centre for putting on a program like this, which can be so helpful to so many people, which can show you that there is something positive coming out of difficult times. And when you feel that gratitude to your, if you like, spiritual friends or whatever you want to call them, and that brings this beautiful energy into the mind, which enables the meditation even more. And as you find a degree of calm and awareness, you will notice that one of the things in your awareness is your breath. And if you have found a degree of mindfulness and clarity, you can very gently direct your attention to your breathing. The idea here is not to hold on to the breath or force the breath in any way, but to stand back from the breath and just be aware of its existence. And as that awareness increases over time, you just follow along and see where this meditation leads you. And we are now coming close to the end. Before we come to the end, please just take a minute just to reflect back on the meditation. If you do feel a bit more peaceful now, if you do feel a bit more at ease, if your general state or sense of well-being has improved, then ask yourself the question why that is the case. How does this process actually work? What is it that is the right attitude to have during meditation practice? Okay, so that is the end of the meditation. So please come out and we can carry on next.
Thank you, Ajahn Brahmali. We'll move on now to some Q&A from the audience. We have some email questions and we also have some questions from our Q&A. So feel free to keep asking questions. The first one we have is from Chris. What is the role of a community and actual human teachers in developing a meditation practice? Especially in lockdown, many people are meditating alone, using smartphone apps for guidance. Do you think that a deep practice can be developed in one's own using a smartphone app?
Yes, you can. You can certainly do things on your own. It is not required to have a teacher who is present and who is there with you. And these days, also things like this event right now, we can do so much over Zoom these days. And it's quite possible to have a virtual community, people who live far away, but to kind of still you generate the kind of a positive feeling, even though it is via a video camera or whatever. So yes, indeed, it is possible. Once travel becomes easier, it's possible to meet teachers and meet people in person. That can also be very interesting and sometimes even more powerful. But I think both ways are perfectly valid ways of going on the spiritual path. But in general, the idea of community and spiritual teachers is actually very important in Buddhism, certainly, but I would say in general for spiritual well-being. And the reason is that there are people in this world who have practiced the spiritual mind very well. There are people who have great insights into the mind, the workings of the mind, and people like the Buddha. I mean, that's what I would say, isn't it? But I would argue the Buddha is one of the greatest people in terms of having insight into the human experience. And because of that, we have something to learn. It's like when you want to become a doctor, you go to university, you don't start cutting in people straight away because you're going to make a mess. You're going to end up in jail if you do that. So community is important, and spiritual friendship is important because we all tend to help each other to lead in this direction. We are conditioned by our surroundings, we're conditioned by the people we're with them. So it actually matters quite a lot.
I would just add to that. I think one of the things we need to take caution with respect to with apps and things of that sort is that the kind of community and the sort of the spiritual colleagues and the connections that we're forming that can really help to nourish us and sustain us on this path, they can be absent if we only try to do it that way. And that may be the only thing that's available to us. And in that case, that there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, to pursue things in that way. But I would really encourage people to consider if you do have community or a way in which to engage with community to really help nourish you on this path. I think that the likelihood of you finding something profound and really establishing a much greater sense of well-being is likely to be much greater. And also just addressing any issues that may arise for you in these practices, trying to figure out how to best move forward and not get stuck in particular ruts, or as Ajahn Brahmali suggested, to help incline the mind in a particular way and to be reminded to reflect back on certain positive aspects. Those kinds of gentle reminders certainly can be provided in recordings, but it's incredibly helpful, I think, to have someone physically there, or even remotely or digitally there, to kind of nudge you or remind you of those things as you practice.
Yeah, I think there's a balance between community and teachers and solitary practice. When you get the balance right, but that's when we get the best outcomes of this kind of spiritual practice. Yeah.
I have a question from Maria. What if you feel too busy to even stop and meditate, even in lockdown? Sometimes it feels like everything will fall apart if I don't keep going.
Okay, I will just answer firstly, if that's okay. Just I'll just go ahead. And the thing is that we sometimes if you are to be more efficient, sometimes actually it is worthwhile, if you like, to kind of disconnect a little bit from the world. Sometimes when you work too much and you're always busy, you end up being less efficient in what you're doing. If you disconnect a little bit, sometimes you can get more done in a shorter period of time. So why not? And then you actually have more time in the long run. But the other thing is to remember that there are values in the world that are more important than just getting things done in life. There are inner things that you want to develop. If you develop your inner life, you actually gain access to satisfaction and contentment and happiness, even joy in life that is impossible to get through ordinary things. So sometimes it's a matter of priorities. What are you in the longer term? What is our personal priorities in this life? And I think you will never regret using more time on this, what I would call spiritual matters, inner development. I think when eventually you come to your deathbed, we're all going to have to die one day, that is what is going to sustain you at that point.
Yeah, the question immediately triggered for me, and I was curious if you would have said it, but Ajahn Brahm sort of said something the last time we spoke to him, which essentially was the less you might be inclined to actually meditate it, or the more you may feel like you don't have time to meditate, the more you probably need to do it. And essentially that, exactly what you said, sort of paraphrasing that, really it's sort of when you find yourself busiest and, doing so many things in the world that you probably most need that kind of self-nourishment, and ultimately giving yourself that space for self-care and introspection, and sort of, recentering yourself and ensuring that your actions are aligned with your values. All the rest of your work and your day-to-day activity is likely to fall in place and be much more efficient, as you said, at the end of it all anyway. So
We have a question from Jack. If the ego complex is a construct of conditioned reflexes and does not exist in higher vibrational realms, then what is it that exists to witness the non-existence of the ego self?
Can you repeat that again? I was having hard to get that properly here.
If the ego complex is a construct of conditioned reflexes and the ego complex is a construct of
ego complex. Okay, sorry. Right. Okay. Yeah.
The ego complex is a construct of conditioned reflexes and does not exist in a higher vibrational realms, then what is it that exists to witness the non-existence of the ego self?
Okay, I see. Yeah, and this is a very common question. And the point is that the witnesser, the thing which is knows things in the world. Well, the question is, what is that? And this is one of those very profound philosophical questions, which was very up for debate at the time of the Buddha 2,500 years ago. And the question is: the observer, is that a self? Is that a me? Is that an entity which is kind of solid and is always there? Or is the observer merely a process in time? Like, if you like, a stream of consciousness is what we often call it in Buddhism. And that is what you have to find out. And this is what this path is a lot about. And according to Buddhism, what you find, if you look at the observer, if you look at the awareness itself, you find that actually the observer itself is nothing solid. The observer itself is something which comes and goes and flows from one sense to another one. It doesn't have any inherent thing. So there is observing, but there is no entity which does the observing, if you like. That is the Buddhist position on this particular question.
I don't think there's much to add there from the psychological perspective. It's quite a challenging question, and I mean, there are a number of interesting books that have been written on the topic. That one by Mark Epstein comes to mind called Thoughts Without a Thinker, which I think parallels these kind of Buddhist ideas that, you know, we often sort of assume that we are our experiences or we are our thoughts, and certainly perhaps from a psychological sense we are a collection of those. But I think, you know, to think about sort of the way in which this is talked about in Buddhist context, there's no single thought. Or no set of thoughts, or no set of experiences, or nothing that we can actually locate anywhere specifically that individually defines us. And so it is kind of this dynamic, constantly flowing thing that somehow makes up who we think we are. And arguably that sort of is something that we're a bit confused about. We have ideas about who we are. And there's this real question of, is that actually who we are? And I think I fully agree that this practice is fundamentally about exploring some of that. Who are we really? What is this experience that we're having?
We have a question from Monique. When meditating, are you supposed to simply watch your thoughts go by? Or do you have to try to think about positive ideas? Is meditation supposed to be neutral? For example, neither positive nor negative in thought. Is it the absence of thought altogether?
It is all of those things, yeah, and it depends on where you are in your meditation practice, which one of those things it is. So you have to kind of structure your meditation in such a way that it leads in a certain direction. So in the beginning, meditation is about just developing, having the ability to sit back and be aware, not be involved in the stream of your thoughts. One of the big problems in life is that we are a character in our story, and we get involved in the stories, and that's what the loss of mindfulness is, when you are completely involved in things. And then you say, oh, wait a minute, well, I'm just getting involved in a fantasy, and you step back, and then you know that you were involved in the fantasy, and that at that moment it's like a small awakening experience. So initially we try to extend that ability to be aware. We see our thinking mind rather than being involved in the story. Yeah? And this is how we gradually develop mindfulness. But it is, as you say, it is also an important part of the contemplative life. If you kind of expand on this, it is actually an ideal. We also want to move towards more positive thoughts and more positive mental states, absolutely. And a part of that is to develop certain mental attitudes, mental qualities that lead towards more positive mental states. We have something in Buddhism called metta meditation, which can be translated as kindness, friendliness, loving kindness, something like that, leaning the mind towards that. And also what we do outside of meditation also matters enormously for how we then deal with the meditation later on. It's about nudging the meditation sometimes very gently in the right direction, as I said before, having a sense of gratitude, to people who make things possible, counting your blessings in life. I know that's an old cliche to count your blessings, but actually it's a wonderful thing to do, to be able to do that. And then ultimately, as all of these things come together, what you will find is that your mindfulness improves. And there comes a point when you will be able to still the mind completely. There will be no more thoughts inside. You will be able to watch the breath just standing back. And that is the real beginning of real meditation. When I say real meditation, what I mean is the Buddhist meditation. What we mean by meditation in Buddhism, it really starts when you have the ability to be aware of the breath, and then it can take you to some extraordinary places from there if you keep carrying on from that.
Yeah, I would just add that I really appreciate the kind of the way in which Ajahn Brahmali has again sort of helped to frame this, which is, I think of it as a gentle nudging. And I think that's a really nice way to think of things. It's not a forcing oneself to be positive, or as sometimes we hear sort of in certain circles, there's this tendency to want to always be optimistic or always think positively. And I don't hear that sense. It's not necessarily about forcing oneself to be positive even when events are negative. It's the gentle inclination or the gentle nudging of your mind towards things like gratitude and towards positivity. And as Ajahn Brahmali indicated in the practice, by doing so, you sort of will be directing the mind or turning the mind in that direction. And doing that over and over again will hopefully start to kind of lead the mind to be inclined more naturally towards that positivity.
We have a question from Tim on the chat. Sometimes in the grip of anxiety or a panic attack, meditation would be excellent for calming the mind, but anxiety overrides your capacity to attempt meditation. How can you best sit with the anxiety to get to a place of being able to meditate?
This can be challenging. What I would recommend is to really, it might be better off meditating when you don't have very strong anxiety. The stronger the anxiety is, the more hard it is to come to be aware of it. But you can build up some meditation outside of the anxiety. And then when the anxiety comes, usually you will be able to deal with it in a better way because the mind is more prepared, the mind is more ready to deal with it. But ideally, what you would like to do is to keep your awareness when the anxiety comes. The great thing about awareness is that you start to be able to look at the situation in a neutral way. When you are involved in things, you're not really able to contemplate them at the same time. But if you are aware, you can see what is happening, and you can see especially the causes that lead to the anxiety. You can see the process happening. And once you understand the process, you can see the things that are the underpinnings of these negative emotions that we'd rather not have. Then you can do something about it. Then you can change your attitude. You can think about things in a new way. You can realign your perceptions. And all of this will then help you to come out of that. So try to gain some insight into your anxiety. Why is it happening? And then you will have the resources to overcome it. If you want some help with those resources, then I'm sure some of us will be around, Nicholas or myself or some other teacher that would be happy to help you to kind of move in the right direction if possible.
I think this is such an important topic. I just want to add that, we often, I think in the kind of Western conceptualization of mindfulness and meditation practice, it tends to get labeled or used only in moments when things start to get really bad, or only we talk about it, or we think, it's commonly sort of thought of as a method for stress reduction or a method for managing mental health. And the reality sort of is, I think wonderfully put by Ajahn Brahmali, that trying to engage in these practices when you're really distressed is not the best time to start. You wouldn't want to learn to drive a car while on the interstate, with cars zipping past you. You practice in an empty car park. You practice, you know, in a place where sort of it's easier to do. And then when you're confronted with difficult emotion, anxiety, things like that, you have some experience with what to do and how to do it. And so I think it's, for me, an important take home is that if you're experiencing really intense emotion, there might be better things to do to deal with that in the moment, but also that you really do need to cultivate the capacities of mind, and you need to develop the ability to calm oneself and the ability to sort of direct the mind and work with the mind before sort of really trying to use these techniques to engage with it, because you don't want to sort of just jump into the deep end.
I think we are coming to the end of our session, so I'll ask you both one more question, and then it might be nice to end on some advice for people. We have just found out we'll be going through another 7 days of lockdown, so maybe a little note for people living in Melbourne. So our last question is more about the process from Kiri. I had thought that following your breath was the way to begin meditation, but it seems from this practice that settling the body and mind is a starting place, and following the breath comes later during the meditation. Have I understood this correctly?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is such an important point, because if we don't have sufficient mindfulness, first of all, if the awareness isn't clear enough, then you will not be able to follow your breath. Or if you are able, you will only be able to do it through an act of willpower. And if we use too much willpower in our meditation, it's going to be uncomfortable. You won't really enjoy the benefit. And this is a big problem in meditation circles. In many places, the idea of using willpower in meditation. The ideal thing in meditation is to be able to just sit back and just be aware without being involved at all. And if you do it right, it can be very pleasant. And a lot of the time, the willpower drains out energy. It is not sustainable really in the long run, and you don't feel at ease. But if you really sit back and you just follow things along, then the ease comes, then the mindfulness arises. And when all the conditions come into place, the breath tends to arise in your mental eye, because the breath is part of our experience. And then when the awareness is there, then you carry on naturally watching the breath and take it further. That is what I would recommend. And I think from experience, a lot of people find that works well.
Yeah, I would say, just from a sort of behavior change or a psychological science perspective, you don't, finding a way to sort of set yourself up for success is important. And certainly there's an element of finding a way to sort of find yourself present and find yourself in your body and ensure that the body is calm and ensure that you're in a situation or a context where you are, ready. And as Ajahn Brahmali said, you don't have to exhibit too much effort to kind of get where you want to be going. It certainly is, it creates a much better starting place. I do think there's a lot of variability within different traditions as to what exactly you focus on in the practice, and certainly in the same traditions as well, whether that be the body or the breath and what order or how you do it. But I agree that, this idea that sort of trying to bring yourself to a place of calmness and sort of a place of quiet certainly is going to set you up in a way that is going to make the practice likely to be more successful, or likely to be easier, I guess, or less effortful. Then I guess perhaps we'll just end with the advice or thoughts for what people might do in the next little while. Perhaps I'll start, and then I'll let Ajahn Brahmali close this off. I think it's important, sort of some of the things that were conveyed in this session to think through, but both at the beginning in the practice and in this discussion to think about in the next little while, particularly next week. But things to try to be subtle about recognizing positive things where they happen. So not trying to be overly optimistic, not trying to tell yourself things are nice when they're not, but trying to notice small positive events, trying to notice things that you can be grateful for, and trying to shift the mind and trying to orient yourself towards some pleasant experiences. So maybe it's a friend sends you flowers, or maybe you might send a friend flowers somewhere else. Maybe it's gratitude for events, or organization of support, or there's so many organizations in Melbourne in particular and in Victoria that sort of have been delivering meals The Sikh community has done an amazing job of going out and ensuring people still have access to food. There's all the frontline workers that are out there ensuring people can still be vaccinated. And there are people sort of out there busily looking after everyone physically. And then there's also lots of people out there looking after everyone mentally and spiritually. And so you can remember that all these people are out there, and it may sort of provide that sense of both gratitude and sort of warmth for you, but also a sense of knowing that there are people out there that can help you if you need them.
Great. Yeah, no, I fully second that it's important to focus on the kindness in the world. There is a surprising amount of kindness in the world if you know where to look. And the wrong place to look is the news at night. Yeah, that's a guarantee, the wrong place to look. Yeah. But remember also that everything in life, this too will pass. Yeah, everything passes. It is a temporary setback, and things always get better again at some point, and then they might get worse again. And this is life. And one of the great takeaways from this is to remember to have compassion. Yeah? When you see suffering in the world, when you see suffering in your own life, remember this is what life sometimes is like. And then we can actually develop a sense of compassion. And to also, when you develop compassion, not to focus too much on the suffering, because if you focus too much on the suffering, you might get depressed, you might feel a sense of despair. But remember that underlying the ordinary problems of life, there are often very beautiful qualities in people. So once that superficial suffering passes, those beautiful qualities will come out again. They are there, they're waiting to kind of biding their time, so to speak. You can see people in war zones going through terrible things. And actually, there are very beautiful people underneath the surface. And in the long run, that is what matters, because that is what will come out in the long run. Anyway, my 2 cents. Great. I better go, Nicholas, because I'm getting late for my next thing. So
yes, thank you so much for your generosity and your time. And thank you all the attendees for joining us today. And we wish you all the very best. And remember to try to hold things with lightness.